Hi there. Greetings, Australia. It's really nice to have you with me, or for you to have me with you, as the case may be. Welcome to my sloppy, messy den here at home. This is where I do my things and my stuff, creating and experimenting and tinkering with various technologies, from the very, very new to, of course, our love, the Apple II and the Apple IIgs. Today I'm going to be talking about making the future of the Apple IIgs our own as developers, finding ways to coming up with ideas for ways that the operating system and the toolbox could be enhanced to make our lives as developers easier. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So in my life, I'm kind of like two developers in one. I kind of lead this double life where I create Apple IIgs software, extensions, utilities, games, etc. But I also work on the Sweet 16 emulator, and I have a lot of enthusiasm for finding ways to integrate the emulator, Sweet 16, with the host platform, which in this case is Mac OS. Features like drag and drop, shared clipboards, all of this kind of stuff that make it possible for somebody to use a GS application as part of their regular workflow, even with their Mac or whatever, and just to share information back and forth more easily. However, doing both of these things, I've run into the same problem, the same difficulty. The GS is not prepared, like big time, for a lot of the new stuff that we want to be able to do. The system software has been discontinued for almost a quarter century now. Holy cow. Excuse me a second. Wow, I'm old. In that age, that period of time, that length of time of not being updated, is causing developers, myself and others, to run into these roadblocks and problems when we're trying to build new software and update existing software even to have new capabilities and take advantage of new technology. Let's talk about some of these issues and what the reasoning behind them is. Over time, we've expanded our search for project ideas. We've had to come up with new ideas because we've done all the stuff, the old stuff, the basic stuff. So we're looking for new things to do, and some of them simply can't easily be done with the operating system the way it is. Pardon me. User interface standards have changed. They've evolved, they've expanded. There are new user interface widgets. Old ones have fallen out of favor. Users are accustomed now to different methodologies for interacting with applications and with software in general. And it would be nice to be able to build our software to meet those modern standards at least halfway, instead of having to build everything very rigidly to an older interface paradigm. We're trying to attach the system, the GS, to new hardware, USB devices, new types of communications hardware, just an assortment of things, integrating card readers, and all of this stuff. And it's very difficult to do some of this because the system just doesn't know anything about these kinds of devices, and we need to find ways to make it easier to integrate these things. And also, from my perspective, I want to be able to integrate the emulator that I work on, Sweet 16, with the host environment. And others do too, I'm sure, to various extents, whether it's supporting basic functionality like file system sharing to more advanced stuff like drag and drop across the two platforms, or clipboard sharing, or all of these kinds of things. So it would be nice to be able to handle those things, and in a more convenient fashion. A couple of real-world examples. I'm going to show you one from each of those two worlds that I live in as a developer. starting with one set of skanky hacks from my past and moving on to another. First off, side click. This is my contextual menu manager for the Apple IIgs. It uses, it adds interface, it adds IPC system requests and things like that to do things like register to context menu is being built, etc., so that the extensions or applications or whatever can add things to the menu if they choose to do so. Right now it's using toolbox patches so that it can detect right clicks. It has to, the system software, the documentation supports the concept of a right click, a button numbered 0 or 1, left or right. But there is nothing in the system to actually recognize a right click. So what I've done is create a toolbox patch that actually detects right clicks coming from Suite 16, which has a mechanism for simulating them. And also it looks for a control click and treats that as a right click. It converts that into a button 1 click. And then it patches the Finder in memory to add a context so that it can add context menu fits for things like move to trash and stuff like that. Because the Finder does not have any IPC for put this item in the trash, which is interesting. So it does some horrifying things where it basically fakes a drag and drop of icons to the trash using fake mouse and Finder patches and things like that. And it's just horrible. Now let's talk about the big one. Suite 16 does a lot of funky stuff to integrate with the host platform, the Mac. First, let's look at Finder patches. Patches the Finder in memory to do these things, to support drag and drop. Those patches include patching the Finder's code that starts dragging as soon as a drag is detected. Right after that, I patch in so Suite 16 knows a drag is underway. And basically it watches every time the mouse moves to see if it's moved out of the window. And if it leaves the GS window, then it knows that you're dragging out to the Mac platform. And it triggers a sequence of actions, cancels the drag on the GS side after grabbing copies of the icons to move them to the Mac side. It builds a list. I mean, it's very, very intricate stuff. It patches the disk switch function in the Finder. This lets the temporary transfer disk that I use. I create a disk image to temporarily hold the files for the process of moving them across the platform. I patch the Finder actually to prevent that disk from showing up on the desktop and from playing the disk insert sound. I also grab a pointer to the Finder's mark volume changed routine so that I can call it to update volume information refreshes as I make changes that are done in the on the emulation side or in the extension that the emulator uses, so that I can then let the Finder know that, okay, yeah, the volume has changed, and it was changed kind of behind the scenes, sneakily. To implement mouse wheel support in Suite 16, I swiped a couple of bytes of the soft switch space, and Suite 16 inserts values there that indicate plus or minus movement of the two mouse wheels, the X and the Y mouse wheels, and then a run queue handler in an add-on installed with Suite 16 checks the values in those switches during a run queue handler to see if there's been movement of the wheel. If the mouse is in a text edit control and there's been movement, it calls TE scroll. So it does a fine control on the window that the mouse is in and looks to see if it's a text edit control, and so it scrolls it nicely using TE scroll. Great. It sets a clip region to avoid highlighting the scroll bars, because the rest of these operations to do the scrolling are very interesting hacks. A lot of fun to work on. Really, really fun to work on, but way more work than it ought to have been, too. If the mouse is in a window that has framed scroll bars, then it just calls fake mouse to click the arrows in the fake, or in the scroll bar. Now, because I've set a clip region to clip out the scroll bar, you don't see those arrows highlight. So it's a very smooth operation. I mean, it looks much better than it would if these things were constantly flickering as you scrolled. If there's not a frame scroll bar, then I scan to the right for a vertical scroll. For a Y scroll, I scan to the right of the current mouse position, looking for a scroll bar. If I find one, then I use that and I scroll it. Similarly, if it's a horizontal scroll, an X scroll, then I look down for the nearest scroll bar and I scroll that. Again, by clicking the arrows. If it's not a desktop application, then the scroll wheel sends arrow key presses up and down to simulate scroll activity. Some other hacks that Sweet 16 does. It customizes it is now safe to shut off your Apple IIgs alert by patching both Finder and Alert window. This way, I am able to capture when this happens and actually add a quick button to that box. There's actually another scenario where I have to patch it as well to catch something else. But anyway, the Sweet 16 supports an option to print to the Mac preview application. This is currently done by intercepting pr.close, grabbing the PostScript files, the temporary PostScript files from the system folder, beaming those over to the Mac using some special code to transfer those files to the Mac side, and then the Mac opens it in preview. A run queue task is basically used to handle other checks related to the print to preview code. Drag and drop. More patches beyond just the Finder patches. I have to patch get next volume. This is related to dealing with the temporary disk image coming up. Handle disk insert, also related to that system task. This is part of the support for scroll events and other custom events. Sysbeep 2, this is to prevent a beep from occurring during certain scenarios where Sweet 16 is doing something that causes one, but we're trying to hide that fact from the user. Alert window, which we've mentioned before, but it's also patched for a couple of other reasons as well, to detect when certain scenarios occur. Obviously, the Finder gets patched quite a bit, and we also have to use a notification proc to detect various scenarios, including leaving GSOS so that we can disable some of our intercepts and things, and coming back to GSOS to reinstall them, that kind of thing. So what I'd love to talk about now are ways to make our lives as developers easier by producing new tools and APIs in particular that can make our lives so much better. Let's start with events. It would be great if we could be notified of events before they're handed to applications. If there were some kind of a hook that you could install into, and it would have to be high performance, obviously. Because we'd be, catching events and being, slowing down the event process. So it would have to be quick. But something where we could be notified, okay, yeah, this event occurred, so that we can grab it. It could be very low level, just key and mouse events probably would be enough, although possibly others as well would be useful. But this would let add-ons intercept events that they needed in order to detect certain scenarios, in order to implement mouse gestures or something like that. I mean, there's lots of interesting things we could do with that. It would be useful to be able to be notified when an event occurs that nobody handles. That way, we could be registered to be the long tail, the kind of the final arbiter of an event, so that we could create, for example, a hotkey handler that doesn't interfere with the foreground application if it uses the same key, that kind of thing. It would be great to have proper support built into the operating system for scroll wheel events with support in tool sets, so that scroll bars scroll, text edit scrolls, all of these kinds of things. That way we could really properly support the scroll wheel in emulators, but also if anybody chose to build a mouse for the GS that included a scroll wheel, or using a USB to ADB adapter, or a USB card with a mouse connected, etc. So there are lots of possibilities there. Similarly, supporting the right-click event, beyond simply labeling it as button 1, to have it so that the operating system really treated them as different activities. Part of that is going to be that, unfortunately, because developers were so used to there only being one button, we typically only checked for, is it 0 or not 0, the button field, and so most applications treat left and right click exactly the same, and obviously that's a problem, so we would probably need to add like a right button or something like that method, or button 2 or something, along with whatever other things we might need to do in the mouse event record, so that they would be properly differentiated and prevent existing apps from treating right clicks as if they were left click. User interface things, controls. It would be great to have an indeterminate flag on the thermometer control. Kelvin Sherlock has done an indeterminate thermometer widget, but I think it would be fantastic if we actually had it implemented as part of the standard thermometer control, so that you could just set a flag and it would become an indeterminate control. I think it would be great to have functionality in line edit for automatic formatting, so that it would only show numbers, or it could be formatted automatically as a phone number, or as currency, or with commas, or whatever. Also, the ability to support character set limits, whether it was saying, okay, here's a list of all the characters that are allowed, or regular expression, or however we chose to do it. Actually, a regular expression handler would actually be kind of awesome as a miscellaneous toolset feature. In fact, it would be fantastic. Support for a tabbed box or a multi-panel box, so that you could have multiple panes sharing the same area in a window. Currently, you can kind of simulate that using a pop-up and a box control and a rectangle control, and then manually swapping them all around. But it would be great to have that properly done as part of the system. And similarly, a disclosure widget, the little triangle where you click it and it rotates down and opens up a box below it. I think that's something we need as well. Basically, ways to maximize our ability to make use of screen space, since we have so little of it. Slider controls would be great to have. Some people have sort of abused scroll bars as if they were sliders, and that's horrifyingly ugly. And it would be great if we had proper sliders, or even knobs, or, both, whichever. Date and time pickers would be a nice choice. Entering dates and times is always kind of a pain in the butt, and it would be great to have them. I think maybe it's a little ambitious, but it would be awesome if somebody did it. Combo boxes. These are line edit controls, but they have also a pop-up associated with them that lists default values you can choose from. Having a combo box like that would be great. Obviously, this is something that's relatively easy to implement on your own, but it would just make life a little bit simpler for people to actually have it as one control. Since it could be implemented as a one of those controls where the has multiple existing controls together, it shouldn't be hard to do. Also, we need support for a wider range of key equivalents. Right now, they're basically just command whatever. It would be great to be able to use Option and Shift and Control with the appropriate symbols displayed in the shortcut display if it's visible. And also support for extended keyboard keys like the F1 through F12, delete, insert, home, etc., etc. These are all things that should be supported by the operating system. Oop, that went backward. Menus. In addition to the checked state, whether it's checked or unchecked, it would be great to have an unsaved state. This is something that macOS has. I don't know about Windows, where it will put a dot next to the name if the file is unsaved. It also uses like a diamond for a minimized window, which would also be something great to support, was actually like a dock thing that you could put at the bottom of the screen where you could minimize windows into. That would be kind of cool, or a menu or something. Submenu support. Obviously we have hierarchic. We should look at either integrating it directly into the operating system so that it is no longer patched in, or actually writing a fresh new more integrated submenu support infrastructure. This is another way to make best use of the available space on the GS, I think, and it generally makes organization easier. There's actually another suggestion I will be making here in a little while that will also really benefit from submenu support. Again, key equivalents using Option, Shift, Control, drawing the equivalents using the appropriate symbols, all of that, again, would be incredibly useful. And supporting those keys then as keyboard equivalents for menus, so that you could have F12 trigger a menu item, for example, that kind of thing. It might even be nice to add the ability to add like a second set of keys to menus, so that you could have like as an alternative, these function keys also work in addition to some other combination, so that you could have it work for both people who have an extended keyboard and not. In fact, it would be cool if you could automatically detect the extended keyboard and switch like between using a like F12 and Shift Command 5 or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, see how many ideas there are? I'm coming up with new ones as I go. Desk accessories, extensions. Nowadays, we're using NDAs to simulate the multiple application environments people are used to using in their day-to-day lives. We need to find ways to make NDAs better, easier to build, more powerful, etc. First off, I think it needs to be easier for NDAs to have menu bars. They can currently in their own window, but you have to kind of jump through some hoops to do it and do a lot of things manually that you don't normally need to do manually. I think we should make it so that that can be just done automatically. Just say, hey, this NDA has a window, a menu bar in the window. Or maybe we have it so that desk accessories can create a menu bar such that when the DA is in the foreground, that menu bar replaces the menu bar at the top of the screen. That would be even closer to simulating a real shared environment, similar to what the Mac does, where as you switch apps, the menu bar at the top of the screen changes. So we could go either way there. Certainly replacing the system menu bar would save space in the DA window, which could be incredibly handy. Those pixels are valuable real estate, obviously, on a screen that is only 200 pixels tall. There are things like resource app switching that are still kind of awkward and a hassle to do that could be done for us. We could set a flag saying, hey, before calling my code, switch into my resource app and whatnot, make my data bank this and things like that, so that we could build our code more quickly and easily and probably with less propensity toward making mistakes if we could rely on the operating system to set those things up for us before our code executes. Similarly, or in addition, I should say, let's add a request so that the system can say, hey, your U extension or desk accessories, if you're running right now, you need to return so that the application that's in the foreground can do its thing again. You're taking too long. This will give us the ability to create desk accessories that could be a little more vigorous about their use of the processor, instead of having to do things in very small chunks and handling switching back to the application manually. They could just run until the system said, hey, it's time to give it up. That would also give us some support for, some better support for switching, being more of a multitasking type of system when desk accessories and other code could be a little less reliant upon each other to maintain order like that. We can probably find a lot of other things we could do, like stashing the any direct pages that are used by these things that are not needed typically unless the thing is directly running. We could stash those out of bank 0 to free up space for other things, that kind of thing. I mean, there's some interesting things we could do. Extensibility stuff. We need a contextual menu manager. I talked about side-click earlier, but it's done through IPC. It would be great if actually we had in the toolbox support for registering to add things to the contextual menu, used on controls, on windows, on the desktop, on in the Finder, on icons, all kinds of things like that. Have it so that areas of the screen or objects, controls, menus, etc., could register to support a context menu. And this is a case where having support for hierarchical menus would be useful, so that you could add a submenu to the context menu for a given add-on that has multiple options, that kind of thing. Menu bar extras. Currently, there are a couple of things that put stuff in the top right corner of the screen on the GS, Transprog 3, for example. But they do it through a hack, and it's a great place to put stuff. But it's difficult to do, and it's hard to do safely. It would be great if we actually integrated support for creating items that occupied space at the top right corner of the screen like that. This is something that's very popular on the Mac. You look at the typical Mac user screen and they have a bunch of stuff up there, some of which they use, some of which they don't. Obviously, we'd have to be more judicious with how many we put up there because of the space available, but I think it would be fantastic to make use of that space. Such that you could click on it. You could use it just to display like the date and time or whatever, but you could also click on it to drop down a menu that you could choose to do stuff from. Or click it to pop up a window, or to pause and unpause some operation, etc. We need, I think it would be great to have event manager calls to register and unregister, to monitor events. This would let us support things like hotkeys, mouse gestures, stuff like that. And I talked about that a little bit earlier, but I think it bears repeating here, because it would be great for add-ons. I think it would be awesome to have support for file conversions in standard file operations. Obviously, standard file right now is primarily about creating the user interface to pick files and to choose where to save files. But we could add support to that for having a pop-up for listing conversion tools, so that an add-on could say, hey, I can convert text files into RTF format. So if you were in a text editor and you went to save, you could actually have at the bottom, okay, well, the input file is text, so it's, it can output RTF using this add-on. Support for that would be awesome. Obviously, standard file doesn't do the saving itself, but we can modify the reply record to include information on how to deliver the file data to the add-on for conversion before saving it. Or to let the add-on save it, actually, would probably make even more sense. Finder IPC, lots of stuff we could do here. This is just a taste. Implement drag and drop support. Well, drag and drop is already supported, but we need to implement stuff so that we can monitor it. Finder says drag start, drag cancel, drop, things like that. This would let us watch these operations, but possibly even take them over. For example, in Suite 16, when I want to grab drag and drops to handle taking them over when they just depart the GS screen so that I can transfer that operation to the Mac. Support for detecting when a file operation is beginning, things like file copies, moves, deletes, etc. This would let us either take over those activities if we were going to do something interesting with them, or abort those activities if we determined that it wasn't something we wanted to permit for whatever reason. Obviously, support for context menus on icons and selections of icons, desktop, folder windows, the trash, anything else we want to add that to. There'd be use cases probably for submenus and adding support for Finder extensions to add a submenu instead of just a single item or a set of items. Sorry, I get parched easily. Task management. Today's user needs to do more than one thing at a time, so we need to improve APIs for cooperative multitasking and scheduling of activities, the run queue, the scheduler, and so on. There's a lot of stuff we could do here, and to be honest, I don't have a lot of answers at the moment, although I know we can make it better. Certainly we can do things that allow code to run without having to be quite as timid about what it does. Part of that can be, improving scheduler to make it more flexible and more powerful, and to support more than 4 scheduled things at a time. The notification manager idea. Currently, if you're running in add-on code, extension code, or in a patch or whatever, there's no way to notify the user of something. And so you have to use a run queue task or a scheduler task and all this stuff, and then do your own dialog box or whatever. I think it would be great to have a notification manager when you say, hey, when the system is able to do so, please pop up an alert saying such and such, or ask the user for permission to do that, or play a sound, flash an icon in the dock, or in the menu bar, I mean. All of these kinds of things. And then call this function if they click yes, continue, or these kinds of things. We can come up with a great design for this. And I think that would be really useful to have. It would really improve our ability to build applications and perform tasks on the GS that include background operations. Printing. I think the print manager needs to have direct support for printing to file. Suite 16 has to kind of do skanky hacks, including a patched version of the LaserWriter driver that basically aborts the print operation before actually printing and deleting the saved temporary file. And so I think what needs to happen here is we need to actually have the ability to do this directly, and that may involve just a custom driver for that, so that you just say, hey, print the file or whatever. Certainly doing it for PostScript is relatively easy. Doing it for other types of printer might involve port drivers where you can save the output from an Epson driver to disk or whatever. But the most useful case for this obviously would be for PostScript. Even cooler would be PDF export, but that gets more involved. I think we also need to add some IPC to the print manager, send notifications when printing begins, when a page has been composed and is ready to send to the printer, so that for example, an add-on could superimpose something on the page so that it could grab the page data and deliver it to some kind of a utility, that kind of thing. Also, notifications for when printing is complete, when printing is canceled, and so on, so that we don't have to use as many tool patches to do things. That's generally an overriding mission I have here, is avoiding having to patch things to implement new functionality. Let the receiver of the IPC take over the output of that data so that it can handle outputting it to whatever device it chooses rather than delivering it to the port driver. Or perhaps if you're doing it at a port driver level, then you're just outputting it somewhere other than an actual device, saving it to disk, delivering it through some kind of interface to the host platform on an emulator, sending it over USB, whatever you chose to do. Some of that could be done just by implementing a port driver. Some of it maybe not so much, but having the ability to do these things could really open up some options for us. So Apple IIgs forever. These are just a few things I've run in personally, but if we can make even some of these things a reality, we will make it so much easier to create new and more capable and more advanced and more modern applications on the GS. Obviously, there are lots of other things that could be done, lots of other ideas, lots of other potential options for things we could do. So what I'd love to do with the rest of the time here is discuss that. Come up with a list of things, come up with some ideas, hash some ideas out, think about things, so that we as developers, those of us who are developers, can start building a new generation of GS applications, games, utilities, tools, and really expand on what we're able to do. Because the best way to ensure the Apple II and the Apple IIgs live forever is to boost it, make it so it can do more and new things, and that would be awesome. And thank you for listening, and let's talk about this now. Thank you.